John Stifel, the Deputy Editor, is with me here, and joining us from Nottingham, Alistair Campbell, in a moment. John Stifel, thanks very much for coming in. Your paper wrote, and you restate today, that Ralph Miliband, who fought for this country, his country, in the Second World War, hated Britain. How can he possibly claim that?
I think it's very simple. We examined Ralph Miliband's views as they were put forward in his writings, his diaries, his books, his speeches, and those views conveyed an impression of what he thought about Britain, which was very antipathetic to the views and values of an awful lot of British people.
You said that he hated Britain. He had an evil legacy. He was a man who served in the Navy, who couldn't join up to the Navy fast enough, who offered his life, who raised his sons here, was evil.
We didn't say he was evil.
That showed he hated Britain. Ralph
Miliband wasn't a private individual. He was a very public man. He was an academic, a political activist, an author. Make those things together and you combine them with his espousing of a Marxist ideology, that, in our view, represented someone who hated British values.
Analysing British politics is not hating your country, surely. What are the values he hated then? I mean, you can have disdain for a lot of things, you can question a lot of things. Surely that is the free speech that your paper so espouses.
I wouldn't dispute or argue with anyone's right to question things.
Then?
His perspective politically was very much that of a Marxist. He was a supporter of Marxist ideology. He was a supporter of the Marxist ideology which was being used to run governments in other parts of the continent and other parts of Europe, which was responsible for an awful lot of terrible, terrible things, including millions and millions of deaths.
So, was the point of this article that your paper implies now that Ed Miliband hates Britain and that he is a rabid Marxist or a communist?
It certainly was not the point of our article to say that Ed Miliband hates Britain.
And parents are important. I'm wondering if the current Viscount Rothermere, whose family owns your paper, is tainted by the article that his great-grandfather wrote in 1934 entitled "Hurrah for the Black Shirts" in praise of British fascists.
I don't think so, and most importantly, I don't think that I don't think it's relevant to bring up a piece from 80 years ago that was written by a member of the Rothermere family. Most importantly, I don't think that I don't think it's relevant to bring up a piece from 80 years ago that was written by a member of the Rothermere family. Most importantly, I don't think that I don't think it's relevant to bring up a piece from 80 years ago that was written by a member of the Rothermere family.
I mean, I thought this was going to be a debate, not a sort of pathetic ramble from John Stifel, reading out the lines written from him by Paul Dacre. Can I say, first of all, Emily, you said that the Mail is a formidable opponent. The Mail is not a formidable opponent because it's run by a bully and a coward, and like most cowards, he's a hypocrite as well. Paul Dacre hasn't got the guts himself to come on this programme and defend something which I know John Stifel believes is not defensible. And when he talks about Rothermere and what his relatives wrote about Hitler, the sole bit that they've relied upon for this piece is something that Ed Miliband's dad wrote when in his diary when he was 17. And what you've got to understand about the Daily Mail, it is the worst of British values posing as the best. And when Ed Miliband went out today, he went out and demanded a right of reply and spoke as he did today. He did that, and I'm glad that David Cameron and Nick Clegg have supported him in what he did. He did it because he actually believes in genuine political debate and genuine freedom of speech. These people do not believe in genuine debate. If you do not conform to Paul Dacre's narrow, twisted view of the world, as all of his employees like Stifel have to do, you get done in. And all I say to all the politicians in Britain, once you accept you're dealing with a bully and a coward, you have absolutely nothing to fear from them.
He makes very clear that the values he grew up with were the values of his parents, and they have shaped him as a man.
His dad wouldn't support his views. He said that in his speech the other day. He said his dad wouldn't support some of his views today.
There are many of his views that his father would have supported, and indeed, as we know from Damien Bride's book last week, his decision to stand against his brother had much to do with following through on his father's legacy.
That does not mean. Do you believe, Mr. Stifel, do you, not Paul Dacre, who's told you what to say tonight, do you believe that Ed Miliband's dad hated Britain, and do you personally think it was justified to use a picture of Ralph Miliband's grave in your coverage?
Well, first of all,
answer the question. Yes or no? Do you believe that?
As I've said to you, Alistair, our piece was based on an examination of Ralph Miliband's right.
Do you support that headline?
Alistair,
did Ralph Miliband hate Britain?
If you'd allow me to finish.
John Stifel, those two specific points. The headline said, the man who hated Britain, you had a picture of a gravestone with the words, grave socialist.
Let me answer this. First of all, on the headline, it's a well-established principle. If you read that headline in conjunction with the piece, which quotes extensively from Ralph Miliband... You're not defending
the headline, are you?
It's justified. I'm completely defending the headline.
You're embarrassed by Dacre.
Wrong.
You and your colleagues are embarrassed by Dacre. Rothermere's looking at you to be his successor, and that's why you're wriggling now.
I don't resile from the headline for one moment. It's entirely justified. It's entirely appropriate for the piece, and that's why in the paper this morning we made clear we didn't apologise.
Well, you've been very reasonable, so I hope you get the job when he goes.
You asked me a question about the picture of the gravestone. That did not appear in the paper.
Do you defend it? It was online.
Alistair,
you're the biggest news website in the world.
It did not
appear. Do you defend the picture?
Let him
Let me finish. It did not appear in the paper.
Do you defend its use online?
If you'd let me get a word
out,
Alistair. It did not appear in the paper.
Right, the picture online was a picture of a tombstone that said grave socialist.
Indeed, it appeared on our...
Do you defend that?
It appeared on our website. It may very well be that the publication of that picture on the website was an error of judgment. As a matter of fact, when Ed Miliband made a complaint about that on Saturday evening, in fact, he spoke to me personally. I personally arranged for that picture to be removed from online.
So why do you agree it was an error of judgment?
I think using that picture was an error of judgment,
right.
and that's why we didn't use it in the paper.
Do you justify that headline?
Absolutely.
Did Ralph Miliband hate Britain?
I think that headline is entirely justified.
Did Ralph Miliband hate Britain? Having fought in the war for Britain, did Ralph Miliband hate Britain, yes or no?
Ralph Miliband's values, as set out in that piece...
You don't want to say yes, do you? You don't support your editor.
As Ralph Miliband's values set out in that piece made clear, his views were antipathetic to many British people's views, to many of the institutions of this country.
You spoke to Ed Miliband. Did Paul Dacre speak to Ed Miliband as well on Saturday?
He's up on his estate hunting and shooting and
just
fishing.
let John answer.
I spoke to Ed Miliband on Saturday.
And what did you say to him when he expressed his disdain for that article?
I listened to what he had to say, said I didn't agree with him, but said we would consider his request for a right of reply, which we granted him in full in Tuesday's paper.
And did you defend the headline that you had originally put when you spoke to him on the phone?
It wasn't that kind of conversation.
No is the answer to that.
It wasn't that kind of conversation, Alistair. You weren't listening in, I presume.
No, I wasn't, but I kind of have a fair idea what went on.
The conversation was Ed Miliband raising his complaints, me listening to them calmly, considering his request for a right of reply, discussing that with colleagues, and then granting that request.
And tomorrow you're publishing 4 pages of character assassination of Ed Miliband because Dacre, who you know is losing the plot and Rothermere knows is losing the plot, cannot bring himself actually to accept that he's made a terrible mistake, that your newspaper readers, who kind of go along with the very commercial success that you've got, actually now will begin to see what I've known for a very long time, that you are the worst of British values posing as the best. And Paul Dacre is a poison in our national life, and I'm glad that last we're debating it. Right. And I hope next time that he has the guts to come and defend himself.
Two things. First of all,
just to address that point, because a lot of people will say it's a bit rich. This is the man from the Mirror. This is the man who knows about character assassinations. You must know what it's like to play politics with newspapers.
No, because I've just been at the Tory party conference, and you'll find a lot of Tories up there who will remember that when I was a journalist on the Daily Mirror, I respected politics and I respected politicians. And when I worked for the Labour government and the Labour Party, we had to put up with lies from people like Dacre and Stifel day after day after day. One of the things I argued about with Tony Blair was when we used to publish a daily rebuttal of the lies and the smears called Mail Watch, and Tony was got at by some of our ministers and we stopped it. And I hope that Ed Miliband goes back to it, because the public need to know the truth. The real spin doctors are the journalists. The real poison comes from people like Dacre. He's a coward. He's a bully. He doesn't have the guts to come and defend himself against anybody. And the sooner he's gone for British public life,
you are defending everything that your paper has published on this subject so far.
He doesn't believe it, though.
I'm defending precisely what we published. Alistair has no idea what I believe. I defend it completely.
John, I know you're in line for the job.
One final point, Alistair. The idea
that there are a special ilk of people that work at the Daily Mail. They're nasty, nasty people. And it starts at the top with this Paul Dacre guy who has gone too far this time. And I think the shareholders of the Daily Mail Group have got to demand his resignation. Well, advertisers, of course, are the lifeblood of the Daily Mail, as they are for any other newspaper. And it's entirely up to them to take a moral stance on this. And I would urge them, just as a punishment to them, to actually pull their advertising next week and the week after, just perhaps temporarily, just to show them what would happen. Let them stand up and show them what would happen if their revenue, which is really all they're interested in, is taken away from them. Maybe
that was a mistake.
Maybe what you have to do, if you lay down with dogs, you might get fleas, you know, and he is a dog. Trust me, a dog of the biggest order, right?
So if his home is targeted as a result of his address being made public, you're relaxed about that?
Well, I don't know what you mean by targeted. I'm not advocating that there should be any form of violence or anything like that. But
you're relaxed about his address now being in the public domain?
Well, my address is in the public domain. The Daily Mail have put it in the public domain many times. I'm not advocating there should be any form of illegal actions taken at his address. But it would be quite funny if there was a demonstration outside demanding his resignation.
You're accusing the Daily Mail of being below the belt. But the tactics you're employing are equally below the belt.
Yes, you have to fight fire with fire. It's the only thing that this lowlifes understand.
Got their description of Red Ed out there, and that's what's going to stick in people's minds. Isn't that a problem?
You're absolutely right. That is the problem that Levinson most probably touched on in his report, that once the damage is done, it does stick in the minds of people.
So Ed Miliband would have done much better, wouldn't he, to ignore the whole thing, hard as that would be?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And the Daily Mail showed their weakness and showed their fright by having to give him a half-a-page space yesterday, which is very unusual for them.
They then went even further and accused his dad of an evil legacy.
Yeah, very unusual for them, but it shows panic. It shows panic.
Well, we did try to speak to Paul Dacre again today, but he wasn't available. Earlier, I put his arguments to Labour's former Director of Communications, Alistair Campbell.
I have to say, my honest reaction was that when I heard the Daily Mail accusing someone of saying that they didn't like Britain, I mean, I'm not a regular reader of this newspaper, but every time I do open it, it just seems to be overflowing with bile about modern Britain. They don't like working mothers, they don't like the BBC, they don't like members of the royal family, they don't like teachers, they don't like the English football team. I mean, the list goes on. So talk about, kettles and pots and calling each other. I mean, I think it was quite understandable why Ed Miliband should react like that. Because, clearly what was saying about his dad was just sort of out of order. The Daily Mail's free to print what it likes. People like me are perfectly free to say that what they say is wrong. And it seems to me that if anyone sort of excels in denigrating and often vilifying a lot about modern Britain, it's the Daily Mail.
The case for the defence brief.
To be honest, there's a slight difference between politicians tearing strips off each other and knocking the sort of seven bells out of each other in debate, and people saying things about your dead parents, which he strongly feels is a lie. So I think there is a bit of a difference, to be honest, Stuart.
And just lastly on that, it's all based on a remark that Miliband Senior made when he was 17, in which he expressed a hope that he didn't actually want to come about, but it was one of those things that perhaps we all say when we're younger. Stuart, thank you.
Where I do not agree with Paul Dacre is in what he, as he keeps telling us, you should see the article and the copy together. I think he's setting up a straw man to try to knock it down. I mean, the fact is that one of the reasons I keep going on about this is because I think Paul Dacre is an influential person within British public life. He can walk down virtually any street in Britain without anybody knowing he is, because he's scared of debate. But what he can't do, if it's just done totally on his terms with no real scrutiny, with no real debate. They go on about wanting democratic debate. He's terrified of debate.
But he's not a politician. I mean, why does he need to debate? Why does he need to come out and defend himself?
He's come out and defended himself because his paper has been exposed as having done something pretty bad, pretty wrong. 2 to 1, even the readers of the Mail said that they thought he should apologise. That you guys, the television media, you pay far too much attention to the views, not of the readers, but the views of Paul Dacre. The idea that he, with his £2 million salary, his £14 million pension pot, his 15,500 acres up in Scotland... Why is that
relevant? Why do you always go on about that?
I'll tell you why I go on about it, because he projects himself, he presents himself as this sort of voice of Middle England. He's more out of touch than any politician I've ever met.
But he doesn't need to be skint to speak for people who are,
no,
does he?
He doesn't speak for them. He pretends to speak for them.
He went too far and apologise now.
I mean, it's been a bizarre week. week, even by journalistic standards. Last Saturday, the Mail publishes a piece headlined, "The Man Who Hated Britain." On Tuesday, they published this bonkers leader saying he's got an evil legacy, referring to the jealous god of Deuteronomy. On Thursday, the Mail on Wednesday, a Mail on Sunday reporter goes to gate crash a dead uncle's memorial. I mean, what next? Grave robbing? I'm just wondering where you draw the line in going after...
Actually, where the poor man is buried came into the story.
Well,
some kind of weird conspiracy. Because he's buried at Highgate, he must be a bad person.
That's the only thing they've apologised for so far. Look, there's been a grave misjudgment, a deeply hypocritical judgment on the part of the Mail here in asking these questions and posing these issues. Let me ask you this question. When you talk about who hates Britain or who has an evil legacy, who do you think has an evil legacy? A man who sucked up to the Nazis, who made friends with Joseph Goebbels and praised Hitler in the run-up to World War II, the owner and founder of the Daily Mail, Lord Rothermere, or a man who served in the Royal Navy, risked his life for his adopted homeland, Ralph Miliband? Who do you think hated Britain more? And this isn't just about Ralph Miliband, actually, because it's actually opened up a whole debate about the Daily Mail. You want to talk about who hates Britain? But this is a paper... Quentin, let me finish, then you come back in. This is a paper that in recent years said that there was nothing natural about the death of the gay pop star Stephen Gately, who said that the French people should vote for Marine Le Pen and the National Front, who attacked Danny Boyle for having a mixed-race couple in his Olympics opening ceremony, who called Mo Farah a plastic Brit. So let's have the debate about who hates Britain more, because it isn't a dead Jewish refugee from Belgium who served in the Royal Navy. It's the immigrant-bashing, woman-hating, Muslim-smearing, NHS undermining, gay-baiting Daily Mail and the